Hello, this is Dave Sugarbaker, and today is the 22nd day of March 2026, and I have a text from Matthew 6th chapter 44 to 48. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he sends his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. In the first 30 or 40 years after the time of Jesus, new converts were taught the important aspects of Christianity by listening to the eyewitnesses, those who had been followers of Jesus during his earthly ministry. Then, in the course of time, the eyewitnesses began to die off. The church had the letters from Paul and others, and these were read in early Christian gatherings, but another document emerged, predating the Gospels. It was a collection of the most important teachings of Jesus. We know it today as the Sermon on the Mount. That would be Matthew 5 to 7. Luke repeats some of the same material from the Sermon on the Mount, but in its purest form, it's preserved in Matthew. New converts would memorize this summary of the best of Jesus' teachings. The Sermon on the Mount begins with an outline of the spiritual process to become a child of God. We call it the Beatitudes, but it is not a laundry list of the kinds of behavior that God considers blessed. It's an upfront guide for new Christians. This is how you become a citizen of God's new kingdom. The 3-chapter summary of Jesus' teachings went on to instruct Christians on things like how to pray and how not to pray, how to handle the seductive pull of material goods, forgiveness, Christian response to Judaism, love and justice. Much of the Sermon on the Mount is clear and straightforward, but in the middle of this early document, there's a passage that we can get stuck on, and it's a problem of translation. Jesus and the disciples spoke Aramaic, and if they were bar mitzvahed, they would read Hebrew. But the earliest versions of the New Testament that scholars have found are in Greek, the language of education and culture in the ancient world. So here's the translation problem. Imagine for a moment that our U.S. Constitution was written first in a foreign language, say Korean, and the original then was lost, and the only copy of the Constitution that we have had been translated into the language of the Philippines, Tagalog, and then it was translated into English. So I imagine turning the Supreme Court loose on that translated document to determine what the original meaning in Korean was. That's the translation problem that we have with Jesus' teaching on the Sermon on the Mount, from Aramaic to Greek to English. The problem verse is, be perfect, even as your heavenly Father is perfect. Now, we heard the whole section, and it outlines that you should have your sun rise on the evil and the good, and send rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. That's what God does. So you be like that. Wait a minute. God created us human, and human means not perfect. God may be perfectly loving to the righteous and the unrighteous, but we're not put together to be perfect. So to get some clarity, we have to look at the footnotes at the bottom of the page. If you have a good study Bible, there'll be lots of footnotes, probably for every verse or so. In a truly good study Bible, the footnotes would tell us about "be you therefore perfect," that the Greek word used here is translated, and it's the same word as Jesus uses from the cross when he says, "It is finished." And even that verse can be problematic. Was Jesus saying, "My life is over"? Most scholars believe that Jesus was saying his life and his mission was complete, polished off, wrapped up. A generation or two ago, young ladies of the upper class might go to finishing school to become well-rounded, mature young women. So what's the definition of finished and perfect? When Jesus calls our God of love perfect, describing God as loving the unrighteous as well as the righteous, he might also use words like complete or finished or mature or perfected or wrapped up or without loose ends to describe a God who is unswayed by our evil or our unrighteousness and sends us good gifts of the sun and rain anyway. And Jesus says, be like that. That's how you'll be recognized as a child of God. I read an article recently about a celebrity who is trying to find a way to deal with people who throw hateful words at him because of the permission that our culture gives these days to let out and unleash our worst demons. He doesn't respond to hate with hate. He doesn't defend himself. Instead, he changes the subject and he asks sincerely, "How are you?" He inquires about the well-being of this hater who wants to eradicate him. On the night Jesus is arrested, Judas brings an armed gang and identifies Jesus with a kiss. There's a brief scuffle, and one of the disciples draws a sword and cuts off the ear of a servant of the high priest. Jesus tells them to put away their swords and heals the ear of the high priest, one of the group that has come to arrest him. So one of the ways that we know Jesus was Son of God is that he had the same kind of love for enemies as well as friends. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect can lead us down a path of perfectionistic self-punishment. Maybe we need to look more closely at this translation and read, "If you love those who love you, what more are you doing than others? Send your sun on the good and the bad, and your rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. Be finished as your heavenly Father is finished. Be complete as your heavenly Father is complete. Be mature as your heavenly Father is mature." Now, God bless you. Take care of yourself. I appreciate the time you've taken to listen to this, and if it's of value to you, I hope you'll pass it along. But take care of yourself, and I'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye.